When I was 7, I declared that I wanted to learn how to ride. And my parents were a little bit in difficulty. We didn't have a horse, and there wasn't really a riding stable nearby. But there was a pony on a farm, on the Honours farm. Mr. and Mrs. Honour had this little pony. And so it was suggested that I should be taught to ride on this pony. It was a very naughty pony, or perhaps it was just untrained. So it was necessary to hold the pony while I learnt to ride. And a very valiant friend of my parents, called Wilma, said she would teach me. And this meant holding the pony, walking, trotting and cantering with me on the horse, and she telling me what to do. Of course, at the time, I didn't realise it wasn't very easy for someone to teach you to ride, actually hauling the horse along at a trot and racing beside it at a canter. But when you're 7 years old, you don't really appreciate what parents or what friends of parents do for you. And I did sort of learn how to ride. And later on, my father used to take me to a school just outside Oxford, and I would have a weekly lesson. I don't think it was a very good lesson. I remember once there was a teacher who was teaching us how to jump, and she took the horse over the jump and she fell off, and I remember we all laughed. It wasn't very nice. I mean, we were just having lessons in an open field, which is not very sensible, I think, because, you know, horses could just run off in any direction. Anyway, I sort of learned how to ride. But this riding centre had a pony called, quite a big pony actually, it was half New Forest, half thoroughbred, called Abby. And I absolutely fell in love with this pony. She was absolutely perfect. Well, that's what I thought. And my father, I could actually twist my father round my little finger. I just never left him in peace until he actually said he would buy the pony, which he bought for £50. Now, she was a splendid pony, but she was too much for me. And the first weeks I had this pony, I used to ride her every day. We used to have lovely canters and lovely gallops, and went off by ourselves. You can't imagine nowadays a parent allowing a child just to ride off, you know, in the countryside without even knowing where I was. And I will admit something which I know is very wrong, is that I would go out from the drive from our house. It was actually a hotel. It was an Elizabethan manor house, which didn't belong to us, but we lived there for 14 years. And there was a big, thick holly bush just at the entrance of the drive, and I would take my hat, my riding hat, stick it into the holly bush, go off on my ride, and then coming back I would fish the riding hat out of the holly bush, put it on my head, and therefore my parents always thought that I had my hat on, so they were happy. I didn't have my hat on for most of the ride, so I was happy. I'm not saying this was good behaviour. It's absolutely shocking. But I'm just telling you what happened. Anyway, the problem arose when I started to go to boarding school, because this pony of mine, which was being ridden every day, was no longer ridden at all for 3 months at a time. And she became really very difficult. And first she was difficult to catch. The first problem was to catch her. Then there was the problem of bridling her. She was actually head shy, which meant that she was very afraid of anything round her head. And of course, if she hadn't been ridden for 3 months, she was even more afraid. So it was quite a problem to bridle her. And then I wasn't a very good rider. I thought I was, but I wasn't. And she began to discover this. Horses always discover if you're not a good rider. And she began to buck. Now, bucking is usually a straightforward business. The horse puts its head down in front and goes up at the back. And if you keep the head up, more or less, you can at least minimize the effect of a buck. But she had a very clever trick. She not only bucked, but she twisted at the same time. It's called a screw buck. You know, her head goes towards her hindquarters. If she doesn't get you off the first time, or the second time, or the third time, she gets you off the fourth time. The first time you more or less sit on it. The second time, you're just losing your balance a bit. The third time, you're just beginning to go down, and the fourth time, you're down. And so I became quite afraid of my pony. And I used to go out riding. I didn't like to admit to my parents. I'd go out riding, but I wouldn't canter at all. I'd just walk and trot. Then I was okay. One day, I remember I did try a little canter, and she bucked me off. And I came off, and I broke my wrist, that I didn't know at the time. And she went galloping off, and I started walking home, nursing my wrist like this. And I found her tied to a hedge, to a gate. And then I found somebody with a car saying, "Oh, we found your pony, and we tied her up. I hope you're okay." And I remember I was a bit stunned, I was a bit frightened, and I never really thanked them. And I always felt bad about that I hadn't really thanked them properly. Anyway, I went home, and I had this swollen wrist, a typical broken wrist. And I didn't want to tell my parents, and I went upstairs to my bedroom, and I put my wrist under the running water, trying to get the swelling down, hoping that, it could get better by itself. But it didn't. So in the end, I had to go and tell my parents that I'd come off my pony and broken they discovered it was a broken, and it's nothing very special about breaking your wrist. It's the sort of thing that happens. But more or less, I think above all, I wanted to protect my pony's reputation. I didn't want them to know that she was playing this trick on me. And probably I deserved it. I probably wasn't just good enough for her. So after that, going to school for 3 months at a time, coming back, I was frightened. I remember going off to try to catch my pony, and I was trembling. I wanted to do it, but I was frightened. And I think once your nerve is gone, it's very hard to get back again. I don't know whether it is entirely back again now, so many years later. But it does help me to understand people who are afraid. I know what it means to be afraid. I know it's often not rational. I know maybe you're quite a good rider, but your fear is there. And I do feel that with nervous riders, I can understand them and pardon them and help them. I think it has helped me as a teacher to understand people who are afraid, even if there's no reason for being so.